I got very, very sick. I was 8.5 years old. We lived in the San Francisco Bay Area in a town called Sunnyvale, which is the birthplace of Silicon Valley. And I mean, what do they got there now? Google and all these crazy stuff there. But anyway, at that time, it was just orchards, and dairies, and, fruit trees and all this kind of stuff. And I got sicker and sicker and sicker. And my mother and my stepfather never noticed, I can't get inside their heads, but for some reason, they kept sending me to school sick, and I had the mumps on both sides. And then I had pneumonia in both lungs, and I had pleurisy, and the lungs were filling up. And I had a kidney disease, and I had about 4 or 5 other things. It kept cascading, start off with the mumps, and then that just sets you up for the next organs and next things to fail. So everything was failing. I was still going to school, and I was looking like a POW. I mean, I just all shriveled up. My back was hurting. And the teacher sent me to the nurse back when they used to have nurses in schools. And she goes, "My God, you're really sick. Go home." So they sent me home. And of course, that's the old days, right? So I get home, and I'm home a couple of weeks, and finally I'm getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And finally my aunt sees me, and she goes, "Oh my God," to my mother, her sister. She goes, "Take him to a doctor." So finally the doctor comes to our house. Now there's something that ages me. House call. Doctors actually went to your house, right? Shows up, and he goes, "Put him in a car. That's it. It's almost too late. Take him to the county hospital." So went to the county hospital. I get there, and it was the first time I was really away from home. In fact, never away from home by myself ever. I was 8.5 years old. I get to the hospital, and they talk to my parents. I hear them mumbling, saying something like, "Well, prepare for the worst because you're bringing them in at the end of this thing," right? I mean, there's not much going to happen. So they told me, "It's a little late coming in. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to take you away from your parents." And they put me in a gurney, strap me down, and my parents leave. Now you can imagine nowadays taking a child to the hospital really sick, and the doctors just go to the parents. Parents leave, drive away 20 miles away, and there you are, 8.5 years old, all by yourself. I'm rolling down the aisle, in the hospital, the hallway, and I see all the lights up above shining down on me. It was just, all I heard was, "He may not live." And they stick these big, huge needles in my back, and they withdraw fluids and more fluids and more fluids. And then when they're done, they just take me to this bed and say, "Okay, get in bed, kid. That's it. Boom." No nurse holding your hand. No comforting. "How are you? Are you okay? Push this button if you need anything." Nothing. Just boom, the lights go off, and there I am laying away from home in a totally pitch black room, having no idea what's going on. And that's where all the magic started. And that's my first night away from home. I spent approximately 1 year in a hospital, total bed rest, most of the time by myself. No television, no radio, no telephone, no books, no toys, magazines, no newspapers, most of the time alone, no playmates. So that's what the beginning of this process was. So a lot of stuff was going to happen. And obviously, looking back on that, you have to realize, being a young 8.5-year-old boy, you're getting ready to face that ordeal for a year. Things are going to happen. Forget the near-death experience. That would change you. But just that alone would change your personality, would change your outlook on life and everything else. So I closed my eyes, and in the dark, you don't know if your eyes are closed or not. It's pitch black, right? Close my eyes, open my eyes, don't make any difference. And I'm laying there, and all of a sudden, I'm spinning, my head is spinning, something's going on. I'm dizzy. But I'm also feeling all the pain disappear. Boom. And then I'm feeling light. When I mean light, I mean LIGHT, and light, like lightweight. And I'm actually feeling weightless. That's the word I should be looking for, weightless. And I'm feeling like I weigh zero. I'm just anti-gravity force. It's like I'm being pulled away from my body. And even at that age, I had the know-how sense to realize that wasn't me laying on that bed. That was the body of this young child, but it wasn't me. The real me was above the body. That's what I realized. I go, wait a minute, I'm above that. I'm looking down. So therefore that can't be me. That's just a shell of me. That's the facade. But that's not the real me. The real me is here. This consciousness that's looking down. This is an 8.5-year-old thinking process, which I thought was, looking back on it, that's pretty amazing, actually. And I just felt this tingly warmth. Picture, because I had an Italian grandmother, picture an Italian grandmother, except multiply it by 1 million. So you got 1 million Italian grandmas getting ready to pinch your cheeks and hug you and kiss you, and they love you, right? Picture 1 million Italian mothers embracing you. That's what it started to feel like. And it was just like, wow, I'm loved. I'm not only loved, I am love. I couldn't see the difference between being loved and loving. It wasn't going out and coming in. It was all one. It was just love. And then I look around at the room and it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. And pretty soon it's like clouds. It's like I'm up in a cloud. There's like this screen of clouds around me. And I began to see a kaleidoscope of seams, which I intuitively knew was the future. And I began to see the next 50 years of my life going forward. Now, what's interesting is most people that you will interview, or if you watch videos at NDEs, most adults, people, they have a near death. What happens? They go through a tunnel of light, and then they have a review, past life review, right? Oh, you messed up here. You did this. What 8.5? What do I got? Oh, you pulled the dog's tail. You made fun of this little girl next door. I mean, what do they got, right? I saw who I was going to marry. I saw my children. I saw where I was going to live. I saw myself fighting in a war in Asia. Had no idea where Vietnam was at. In fact, at that time, it was Indochina, French Indochina. But I saw myself on these helicopter things, looked like tadpoles. Hueys, I know now, but that funny look like a tadpole, long stretched out. They weren't even invented then. We're talking about 1954 or something. So they might have been on a drawing board someplace, but they weren't out there. And I saw myself sitting behind a machine gun. I saw things happen in combat, which when we get to talk about Vietnam, you can see how that relates, and it makes a big difference on your courage on the battlefield where you know what's going to happen. That's not courage. That's just following the script. I might as well have been an actor. It's just like, oh, okay, I know what's going to happen. Anyway, so I saw that. I saw illnesses. I saw events. I saw all these stuff. I saw President Kennedy getting shot. I didn't know who Kennedy was, but I knew it was intuitively. I knew that was a president. It's in a motorcade. I knew it was Texas. And for some reason, I knew it was Dallas. Now, when it did happen, and I told people ahead of time, like school principal and people, a couple of weeks before it happened, yeah, sure, Bill, sure, Bill. And then when it happened, people got spooked, of course. In my vision, and it didn't feel like a vision, it felt like I was actually watching it. More than one person was involved in assassination. So I saw that happen. I saw all this stuff play out. And then I also had this forewarning. There was two numbers, 5, 9, and then when the 5 flipped over, if you take a 5 and you flip it over, it kind of looks like a 2. So it kind of looked like a 29, 59, 29. They kept flowing through the air. And I didn't understand that at the time. Somebody tried to say, oh, well, that's astrology. And it's like at 29 and 59, that's when your Saturn, you pass through Saturn or something, different phase. And when you reach 29 year of your life and the 59th year of your life, it's like a transition period. It's almost like a spiritual death type, things change. And okay, great. All right. But I looked at it and thought, well, maybe that's a health warning. Maybe if I don't take care of myself at 29, maybe I'm looking at death. And maybe at 59, I'm looking at death again. So this near-death experience happened that night, that evening. It could have been all night. It could have been 20 minutes. Could have been 1 minute. Could have been have no clue. When you're in that kind of encapsulated living experience of consciousness, there's no time. There's no reference. It's just, it happens. And there it is, and you know it. So that began my 1 year journey in the hospital. And it was filled with a lot of trials, a lot of lessons and everything. But I could have came away from that whole experience bitter, but I didn't. I had all the time. I wasn't allowed to get out of bed, wasn't allowed to do anything. We're talking, I was there for Thanksgiving, I was there for Christmas, I was there for New Year's, I was there for my birthday, Easter, everything, right? No celebrations, nothing special. Boom. And they'd wake you up at 6 o'clock in the morning when the shift changed, so they could give you your shots and bathe you. And then they'd turn the lights off at 9. And there was nothing scheduled in between except getting shots, tests, x-rays, and just laying there. You could go crazy like. I didn't. Since I kind of knew a little bit about meditation, I started practicing certain techniques. In fact, I was making things up. I thought I was making things up, these techniques. And in fact, I was visualizing air coming into my navel, like I was breathing through my belly button and bringing it up through my spine and stuff, and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And neat things were happening, but I didn't learn these things at that time. But I was exposed over about 50 years later, actually 50 years later, I met a Tibetan monk who didn't speak English, and I spent 3 days with him. And I learned more from him in 3 days of silence than I learned from anybody else. That was in India. That's another whole story. But I found out, first thing he taught me was that technique that I thought I made up. There I was. I come out of the hospital, came home, and I decided that since I remember the 2959, I thought intuitively, I don't know why, but I just said, I think I need to take care of my body. I need to watch what I eat, what I drink, what I take. So I'm not doing drugs. I'm not doing alcohol, not doing cigarettes, no dope. I'm not going to do red meat and beef and pork and all that kind of heavy stuff. So I was back then, you're vegetarian. Well, I wasn't really a vegetarian because once or twice a week I'd have a little fish or piece of chicken once in a while, or turkey on holidays. So I wouldn't call that vegetarian, but it was pretty close. And I went a lot of years on that. And then I became a pure vegetarian later on, but I was only one in the family. And if in the 1950s, if you went to a restaurant or a fast food place or anywhere, there's no alternative. Can I have tofu? Do you have, no, there was nothing. There was no alternatives back then. But so I tried to that's why I had a little chicken and a little fish once in a while, because it was like I had no other choices, especially when I went in the Army. So my first week home, I'm sitting in the front room and I hear this sound of a choir of beautiful feminine voices. Closest sound I could think was when I was in Utah, I was listening to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. I think that's how you say that. Anyway, when I got these voices, it was kind of like that choir singing, except it was softer and more feminine. And my wife, poor Joan slipped there. My mother and I were listening, and she heard it too. And I go, is it on a radio? Is it on television or whatever? So we looked around, we turned everything off. There was no records playing. There was apparently no neighbors playing anything. We went outside, we walked a block away each direction. Sound never changed. It was still the same volume. So finally we came back in the house, and it went on for about an hour. And she goes, my mother finally says, it's got to be a choir of angels, right? I mean, there's no source. It's just coming out of the ether.